All Summer in a Day by Ray Bradbury. Ready? Ready? Now? Soon? Do the scientists really know? Will it happen today? Will it? Look, see for yourself. The children pressed to each other like so many roses, so many weeds intermixed, peering out for a look at the hidden sun. It rained. It'd been raining for 7 years, thousands upon thousands of days compounded and filled from one end to the other with rain, with a drum and gush of water, with the sweet crystal fall of showers and the concussion of storms so heavy they were like tidal waves coming over the islands. 1,000 forests had been crushed under the rain and grown up 1,000 times to be crushed again. And this was the way of life was forever on the planet Venus. And this was the schoolroom of the children of the rocket men and women who had come to the raining world to set up civilization and live out their lives. It's stopping! Yes, yes! Margot stood apart from them, from these children who could ever remember a time when there wasn't rain and rain and rain. They were all 9 years old, and if there had been a day 7 years ago when the sun came out for an hour and showed its face to the stunned world, they would not recall. Sometimes at night she heard them stir in remembrance, and she knew they were dreaming, and remembering gold or yellow crayon or a coin large enough to buy the world with. She knew they thought they remembered a warmness like blushing in the face, in the body, in the arms and legs and trembling hands. But then they always awoke to the tatting drum, the endless shaking down of clear bead necklaces upon the roof. The walk, the gardens, the forest, and their dreams were gone. All day yesterday they had read in class about the sun. How about like 11 it was, and how hot. And they had written small poems and stories and essays about it. I think the sun is a flower that blooms for just 1 hour. That was Margot's poem, read in a quiet voice in the still classroom while the rain was falling outside. Oh, you didn't write that, protested one of the boys. I did, said Margot. I did. William, said the teacher, but that was yesterday. Now the rain was slackened and the children were crushed in the great thick windows. Where's teacher? She'll be back. She better hurry, we'll miss it. They turned on themselves like a feverish wheel, all tumbling spokes. Margot stood alone. She was a very frail girl, who looked as if she'd been lost in the rain for years, and the rain had washed out the blue from her eyes and the red from her mouth and the yellow from her hair. She was an old photograph from an album whitened away, and if she spoke at all, her voice would be a ghost. Now she stood separate, staring at the rain and the loud, wet world beyond the huge glass. What are you looking at? Said William. Margot said nothing. Speak when you're spoken to. He gave her a shove and she did not move. Rather, she let herself be moved only by him and nothing else. They edged away from her. They would not look at her. She felt them go away, and this was because she would play no games with them in the echoing tunnels of the underground city. If they tagged her and ran, she just stood blinking after them and did not follow. When the class sang songs about happiness and life and games, her lips barely moved. Only when they sang about the sun and the summer did her lips move as they watched the drenched windows. And then, of course, the biggest crime of all was that she'd only come 5 years ago from Earth, and she remembered the sun and the way that the sun was and the sky was, and she was when she was 4 in Ohio. And they had been on Venus all their lives. And they had only been 2 years old when the sun last came out, and had long since forgotten the colour and the heat of it and the way it really was. But Margot remembered. It's like a penny, she once said, eyes closed. No, it's not, the children cried. It's like fire, she said. In the stove. You're lying. You don't remember, cried the children. But she remembered, and she stood quietly apart from all of them and watched the patterned windows. And once a month ago, she had refused to shower in the school shower rooms and clutched her hands to her ears and over her head, screaming, "The water mustn't touch her head." So after that, dimly, she sensed it. She was different, and they knew her difference and kept away. There was talk that her father and mother were taken back to Earth next year. It seemed vital to her that they do so, though. It would mean the loss of thousands of dollars to her family. And so the children hated her for all of these reasons of big and little consequence. They hated her pale snow face, her weight in silence, her thinness, and her possible future. Get away, the boy gave her another push. What are you waiting for? Then, for the first time, she turned and looked at him. And what she was waiting for was in her eyes. Well, don't wait around here, cried the boy savagely. You won't see nothing. Her lips moved. Nothing, he cried. It was all a joke, wasn't it? He turned to the other children. There's nothing happening today, is it? They all blinked at him and then understood, laughed and shook their heads. Nothing, nothing. Oh, but, Margaret whispered, her eyes helpless. But this is the day the scientists predict. They say they know the sun. All a joke, said the boys and seized her roughly. Hey, everyone, let's put her in the closet before the teacher comes. No, said Margot, falling back. They surged about her, caught her up and bore her, protesting, and then pleading, and then crying, back into the tunnel, a room, a closet where they slammed and locked the door. They stood looking at the door and saw it tremble from her, beating and throwing herself against it. They heard her muffled cries, then smiling they turned and went out and back down the tunnel. Just as the teacher arrived, ready, children? She glanced at the watch. Yes, said everyone. Are we all here? Yes. The rain slacked still more. They crowded to the huge door. The rain stopped. It was as if, in the midst of the film, concerning an avalanche, a tornado, a hurricane, a volcanic eruption, something had first gone wrong with the sound of the apparatus, thus muffling the finally cutting off all noise, all of the blasts and the repercussions and the thunders, and then, second, ripped the film from the projector and inserted in its place a beautiful tropical slide which did not move or tremor. The world ground to a standstill. The silence was so immense and unbelievable that you felt your ears had been stuffed or you had lost your hearing altogether. The children put their hands to their ears. They stood apart, the door slid back, and the smell of the silent, waiting world came into them. The sun came out. It was the colour of a flaming bronze, and it was very large, and the sky around it was blazing blue tile colour, and the jungle burned. The sunlight, as the children released from their spell, rushed out, yelling into the springtime. Now don't go too far, called the teacher after them. You've only 2 hours, you know. You wouldn't want to get caught out. But they were running and turning their faces up to the sky and feeling the sun on their cheeks like a warm iron. They were taking off their jackets and letting the sun burn their arms. Oh, it's better than the sunlamps, isn't it? Much, much better. They stopped running and stood in the great jungle that covered Venus, that grew and never stopped growing, tumultuously, even as you watched it. It was the nest of octopi clustered up next, great arms of flesh-like weed wavering and flowering in the brief spring. It was the colour of rubber and ash, the jungle, from the many years without the sun. It was the colour of stones and white cheeses and ink, and it was the colour of the moon. The children lay out, laughing on the jungle mattress, and heard it sigh and squeak under them, resilient and alive. They ran amongst the trees, they slipped and fell and pushed each other, they played hide and go seek and tag, and most of all they squinted in the sun until the tears ran down their faces. They put their hands up to the yellowness and that amazing blueness, and they breathed at the fresh air and listened to the silence which suspended them in a blessing of no sound and no motion. They looked at everything and savoured everything. Then wildly, like animals, escaped their caves. They ran and ran in shouting circles. They ran for an hour and did not stop running. And then, in the midst of their running, one of the girls wailed, "Everyone stopped!" The girl standing in the open held her hand. "Oh, look, look," she cried, she said, trembling. They came slowly to look at her open palm. In the centre of it, cupped and huge, was a single raindrop. She began to cry, looking at it. They glanced quietly at the sun. Oh, oh! A few cold drops fell on their noses, then their cheeks and their mouths. The sun faded behind the stir of a mist. A wind blew cold around them. They turned and started to walk back towards the underground house, their hands at their sides, their smiles vanished away. A boom of thunder startled them, and the leaves before a new hurricane. They tumbled upon each other and ran. Lightning struck. 10 miles away, 5 miles away, a mile away, half a mile. The sky darkened into the midnight in a flash. They stood in the doorway of the underground for a moment until it was raining hard. Then they closed the door. They heard the gigantic sound of the rain falling in tons and avalanches, everywhere and forever. Will it be 7 more years? Yes, 7. Then one of them gave a little cry. Margot! What? She's still in the closet where we locked her. Margot! They stood as if someone had driven them, like so many stakes into the floor. They looked at each other and then they ran away. They glanced out at the world. It was raining now, and raining steadily. They could not meet each other's glances. Their faces were solemn and pale. They looked at their hands and feet, their faces down. Margot, one of the girls said. Well, no one moved. Go on, whispered the girl. They walked slowly down the hall in the sound of the cold rain. They turned through the doorway to the room in the sound of the storm and thunder. Lightning on their faces, blue and terrible. They walked over to the closet door slowly and stood by it. Behind the closet door was only silence. They unlocked the door even more, slowly, and let Margot out.